And we're back. You are in the after party now. You're in the private chat. So you got me with my beer, which is running low. Caelan, can I get another one? And you've got Richard here, who's just topped up on his red wine.
A glass of red.
So
It is Thursday night.
So we're gonna knock it back and tell you what we think, and we're ready to discuss. We've been debating already. Actually, we've already been debating lots of things. So we're just going to continue. And the first thing is a question before we get on to your questions. Cheers, Caelan. First thing is a question from me, because Richard has been telling me before that he's got a story about a drug called ivermectin and what it means for COVID. And I've never heard of this before, and I haven't bothered to look it up. But seeing as we've got Richard here, Richard, give your spiel about why this is such an important issue.
And what I'm enjoying is that I'm not a scientist, and I'm going to tell you, a scientist, about ivermectin. So ivermectin is a drug that was founded in the 1970s by a huge US drug company called Merck. Mm-hmm. And it's been used almost...
And note that there are two Mercs. There's the American one,
it's the American
German one, and this is the American one.
And this is a drug that treats parasitic infections, mm-hmm. and was incredibly useful, in particular in developing countries, particularly, for example, in Africa, where river blindness was a huge problem for communities and villages. You would have whole villages that would literally be blind, and the children were leading their parents and adults the way. And
until they got blind as well, presumably.
Yeah, exactly.
Poor things, right.
And so this is a very successful drug. It's on the list of WHO essential medicines. It's sort of considered one of the wonder drugs.
Yeah.
And
there was a real boom of those in the 60s.
Yeah, exactly.
And 70s.
And so very successful. Used by humans. It's also used as a veterinary drug for horses and things.
Yeah.
And in the early stages of COVID, a number of the developing nations started to use ivermectin as essentially partly out of desperation, let's say, with very little evidence.
Give it a
go. You sort of try everything, frankly, and see what works. Obviously, there's a lot of science behind it, but a number of countries, so for example, in Uttar Pradesh in India, a lot of the Latin American countries were using it very quickly, Bangladesh, and various others, started to use it, and there have been about 50 smallish, 30 to 150 people, randomized controlled trials. And, the meta-analysis of this shows that actually there is, a clear relationship between a reduction in deaths and the use of ivermectin. And you had the president of the Indian College of Asthma and Allergies and Immunology last summer saying he couldn't understand, here's a president of an Indian college, why the developed world wasn't properly looking at ivermectin. An existing, cheap,
because
generic.
they know that they're not going to get the vaccines because we're busy sucking them all up. Okay.
And there's some very strange things. So what I would say to viewers and to listeners is I did a Tice Talk special, which is on YouTube. It's a half-hour show specifically looking at ivermectin. I'd urge people to look at it. You can look at some of the examples to do with Peru and to do with Mexico. And the question is it pure coincidence, right? The reduction in cases, in deaths, relative to the use of ivermectin, or actually is there some proof behind it? And I asked, I had two interviews.
Do you know what the basic mechanism of action is for this drug?
Now you are proving that you're a scientist and I'm a layman, because I'm not going to get out of my depth on that.
Right, I'll look it up.
I'm sort of looking at sort of cause and effect or coincidence.
Yep.
And what really troubles me is the impact of big pharma. Mm-hmm. Why hasn't this been discussed at all here in the UK? Mm-hmm. This is a drug that may well be potentially saving hundreds or thousands of lives in individual nation states, and yet there's no discussion here. There's been literally just a couple of articles, one in the Mail, one in the Times. There's been nothing on broadcast here in the UK. The government hasn't talked about it. We know they know about it, but they haven't talked about it. So I've sent a letter to Matt Hancock, which is on Twitter. Viewers, take a look at this letter, look at my show, learn more about ivermectin. I'm going to insist that this is part of the public inquiry as to whether or not the government has looked at ivermectin. And let me just leave you with this question. there is a serious risk that big pharma have chosen deliberately to ignore a cheap generic drug that could save lives, because actually that doesn't suit them when they're trying to earn billions of profits on testing. Think how much money we're spending on testing and developing vaccines. So, this is where, these are big, difficult questions, but they're going to have to be asked and they're going to have to be answered.
Yeah, given that I had a visiting research position at the London School of Hygiene and Tropical Medicine, I am going to ask some of my colleagues about that and see what their
Please let me know their
answers
answers.
on it. Yeah, we'll do. Right. Now I've had my question. Let's get on to all of you lot watching this and what you want to ask, because there's a stream of them. So right, Kaelan, you've added different ones on the top. Oh yeah, okay, right. Prosser says, what's the best way of funding blue sky research? Also, Tice, what was your connection to Farage? Okay, so I will answer the research one. And then, Richard, you can talk about your relationship with Nigel. So, Blue Skies Research is an interesting one. Incidentally, the European Union science programme has a very globally respected funding stream for this, the European Research Council grants, which was initiated largely by the Brits, right, where a panel, a council of scientists evaluate proposals in this, big thinking area, and those that win the grants, get millions for it. And that has proven to work. So I think, when it comes to Cummings, the idea that you would get top scientists deciding on what's good science, and that's the fundamental Haldane principle, that's already being done at that level, but it's for grants of several million, whereas I think what Cummings has been talking about has been a bigger pot of money, even more loosely given, almost without the same kind of scrutiny and evidence levels as you get at the ERC. So for me, I think the ERC is obviously a very well validated model, and it's, various people who've won Fields medals and Nobel prizes have come via that route. So that's the kind of thing that I know is tried and tested, and you could strengthen, and you could, if you felt the need to go a bit broader, I would build on that rather than just having, a massive slush fund and hoping that, one genius is going to have good enough taste to sniff out other geniuses. Because I don't know how you would sniff out that first genius who can detect other geniuses. Who's the genius who has the genius to sniff out the genius who can identify other geniuses? Where does that even start, that process? So I would build on models that we already know work for blue skies research and sort of expand them in a slightly experimental way. Richard.
So, how did I come across Nigel?
Yes.
We were introduced by the late Stuart Wheeler of IG Index fame. He was the guy who gave the Tories £5 million to spectacularly lose an election back in the early 2000s. And so Stuart introduced us because I was very concerned about I was a Eurosceptic. I was very involved in the campaign not to join the Euro back in the late 90s.
Were you a Tory? Did you start off?
Yes,
in the
absolutely.
Party?
I was a card-carrying Tory member for most of my adult life, and indeed donor.
That doesn't surprise me, because
but I ripped it up.
You do look like a Tory,
well,
Richard. Do you think you can win over more Tories with your
I think without
general
question.
Tory vibe? Because you've got a
mean,
much more Tory vibe than Nigel does, right? Nigel always had,
Yeah, the reality is that in a two-party system, there are many people. You end up both parties actually end up being a very broad church.
Yeah.
But I think that the Tories, I now call them the con-socialists, because essentially they stand for high tax, high regulation, nanny state, and I actually don't think that is where the bulk of the self-employed entrepreneurs, small businesses, that's where they really are. And so we're presenting a different, what I call a a common sense pitch to people.
Yeah.
And in
So
a
you're
sense,
classic libertarian Tory, right?
I'm
The interesting thing is
I'm
that,
a libertarian. I'm a libertarian, business-minded doer.
Yeah.
Get things done.
So
And
you
I'm more
seem
interested in,
like the
I'm more
business
interested
thing
in-
is your thing.
I'm more interested in pragmatic solutions to problems than being boxed into sort of ticking a box. I'm a common sense pragmatist that hates waste and inefficiency as opposed to a particular person in a particular box.
So the fascinating thing for me is that like you and Nigel have been together through so many projects together, and yet Nigel and UKIP was the sort of the little spaceship that left the mothership of the Conservative Party, went to the red wall seats, the classic Labour areas, got that hybrid audience, with the badging. It's a mix of blue and red, it's purple,
Yep.
you're appealing to the Labour voters that would never vote Tory because
Yep.
of the Conservative history in those areas. And then when that got brought back to the Conservative Party, then the Conservative Party itself took that economic left shift in order to capture, that essential working man base that is culturally they're conservative. They want to preserve traditional British culture. They don't like anything that they feel impedes on it. But in terms of economics, they want the investment. They don't want it pure business. They think big money should go into the NHS, not necessarily the welfare state, but they believe in a more left model than the Conservative Party has been traditionally.
Yeah, and look, there are differences, but I think the world is moving on, and I think that what I saw in Hartlepool when I stood there in December 19 was that actually, yes, your traditional lifelong Labour voter is deeply patriotic. I knew within the sixth door that Corbyn was in deep trouble.
Yeah.
From the sixth door I knocked. But actually, these are people who are also very disenchanted because they actually feel that they've supported Labour all their lives, but actually their lives haven't got better. They haven't got better public services. They haven't got more money in their pocket. And it's just the same old, same old.
Yeah.
And in Hartlepool, the hospital had been massively downgraded.
Yeah.
And they felt betrayed. They felt abandoned. And
they attributed that to the local Labour rather than the national Tory.
Well, but they also saw that Labour had been in power from '97 to 2010. A big chunk of time.
Yeah.
They had a very senior guy, Mandelson, but their lives hadn't got any better in Hartlepool. If you looked at employment rates, life expectancy rates in Hartlepool, they were shocking. They were markedly worse than rates in the rest of the northeast, let alone the rest of the UK.
Right.
Yeah, markedly worse. And so the point that Reform UK, our key pitch to people is, look, we're going to take 6 million people out of paying income tax.
Yeah.
So we're going to lift the threshold for where you start paying from 12.5 grand to 20 grand. That's material. That puts 6% increase on an average nurse's salary, net take-home pay.
So your stimulation is not by
so
investment, but rather by tax cutting.
Correct, because the individual or the small business owner will always spend £1 in their pocket more wisely and get more value than the bowler-hatted civil servant in Whitehall. So we're going to take 6 million people out of paying income tax.
Yep.
The
Tories, it's small government.
Yeah,
is your model.
small government. Trust the people. Stimulate people. Stimulate activity by putting money in people's pockets. Put money in the self-employed pocket. We would take a million businesses out of paying corporation tax.
You're very good, Rich, because you've effortlessly slipped,
into the business and corporate mode.
Yeah,
and away from
the next Reform
question.
UK. Everyone needs to vote for. So, but your path with Nigel, because then we've got other questions to pop through. But quickly, how did that pathway evolve? What kept you guys close?
From an early introduction, we then started working together, partly during the referendum, but much more when the extent of what we perceived as the betrayal was, as people like you wanted a second vote, and we're being very successful, essentially in moving the debate towards the people's vote.
Yeah.
And what we felt is the deal was getting worse and worse from what Theresa May originally promised. So we then. We really activated, Nigel and I, we got together really closely in August 18, we raised a bunch of money from a bunch of folk. We started doing big rallies around the country with Leave Means Leave.
Yes, I remember
And that was the forerunner to the Brexit Party.
Yeah.
And so we just started working
Because I
closer and
remember
closer.
Leave Means Leave coming on the scene,
Yeah.
and we were doing more like on the street representation,
Yeah.
and we were owning that, and then you guys came along and you were getting people out
Yeah.
on the street too.
Yeah, and then
So when you brought in the Brexit Party,
Yeah.
then the gap between people who were thinking, Brexit was bad and going the wrong way, and those that still supported, that was opening up in our favour.
Yeah.
But when the Brexit Party came along, that suddenly, jumped right down. And that was during the time of the European
and
elections.
so we then obviously, that period was utterly mad, and we were working literally 24/7 together, and it was an extraordinary period.
Right.
Really brutal in all sorts of ways.
So that was
really
the key
brutal.
moment that really brought you two back together and into.
Well, it
intense
started
working.
at in mid 18 really intensely
Yeah.
with Leave Means Leave, and then it just ramped up and grew
Right.
and grew, and all the way through until until obviously all of us are sort of doing less last year.
Yeah.
But yeah, it was a properly.
And now
intense
you've
18
taken
months.
over as his.
Yeah,
gone
so-
off
so
to
now
do
Nigel-
finances.
Nigel's now the honorary.
What is that he's selling on YouTube? Because the ads keep popping up, right? They keep popping up, and I can't sit there and watch Nigel talking again, because I've been bombarded by him for years across the BBC
And
and Question Time and radio. It was always bloody Nigel
So-
Farage, right?
but actually
and
he's
on
always-
Twitter as well. And so then when it pops
He's-
up on
he
YouTube,
started out-
just like close that. So, but what is he selling now?
He started out in the city.
Yeah, I know.
He understands the city. He understands money, and he felt that in a sense, actually, many people are being let down by the way their pensions are being managed and things. So he's putting forward with some others, some other options, and it's an interest to him. And
Yeah,
so
but
he's
Richard,
done whatever it is.
Is he going to scarf
30
from
years.
them too?
I'm not going to answer that. What I'm going to say is, look, I'm looking at some bigger, different issues as we look forward. Some of which are from the opportunities from Brexit, but also some are actually where we align as opposed to differ.
Yeah.
Which is just there are so many areas where this country is just being badly run. Now, you touched on Dominic Cummings earlier. I think his testimony is going to be crucial during this public inquiry. I think the revelation that he just gave a little sort of clue yesterday about the smoking ruin of the leadership of the Department of Health. I've been talking about the flaws in the back office. I think this is really going to come to the fore. I think it's one of the great weaknesses
They
of the
had
civil
no
service.
pandemic preparedness. What we did actually last week on this whiteboard was to map out the waste that had been happening, and on the PPE in test and trace, and on the PPE branch, there was 15 billion spent on PPE, which should have cost 2.5 billion.
But
Right,
it started way back, and there is a total weakness in leadership in the civil service that needs fundamental reform.
That was another thing that they were saying early on. They tried to pull a handle and nothing happened.
And that's always happened. But I've heard for years, and you probably have, from MPs, the civil service is the envy of the world, they're wonderful. Do you know what? When actually the pressure's on, the chips are down, the whole thing broke.
Yeah.
And it wasn't fit for purpose. And thank heavens Cummings and whoever else was involved with the decision did take the vaccine thing away from the Department of Health. Otherwise, we'd have been in the same sort of pickle that the EU have found themselves. Now, you can't surely defend, Mike, the EU's horlicks of dealing with the vaccines. I mean, surely, they've screwed it up.
They were too slow on the approval, and they didn't give any consideration whatsoever to help the nations build up their supply chains like we did in this country. So even though they're taking on a much harder task, because obviously they're juggling 27 countries and their main function is to ensure that the big ones and the small ones get them equitably, which I think if that wasn't there, imagine the bust up that we have with the EU happening all over the place. So that's good, but they have totally screwed up on some very, very fundamental things where they thought they were going to do it really well and they haven't. I think the principle, well, it's often the case, the principle is admirable, but then the execution is certainly
has been woeful. And I think many people have had their eyes opened
Yeah.
And I think it's done immeasurable damage in a way that none of us could have imagined.
Yeah,
to the institution of the EU. I'm not sure von der Leyen survives, actually.
Yeah. Well, I'm glad you're saying I'm not sure von der Leyen survives instead of saying I think this is going to be the end of the EU, because I've been hearing for so many years, whenever there's a crisis, you know, like this new politician has come along, oh, this is the end of the EU now, or that politician, oh, this is the end of the Greek crisis, this is the end of the EU. And so as long as, I mean, the EU will continue and it will adapt and reshape, and it is our neighbours, and we should be engaging with our neighbours.
This shock and this failure of implementation will force reform in the EU, and that will be a good thing.
I hope so.
And there'll be lessons to be learned.
So.
Let's hope so.
Yeah.
You know, we, however old you are, none of us are perfect. None of us know anything, and we should always continue to learn lessons, because that's how you improve. And I think, you know, this for the EU is a proper wake-up call.
Yeah.
I
hope so. I do think that during the Brexit negotiations, the EU pulled it together, and I do think Barnier was really competent.
He was outstanding. Yeah.
Yeah, and I just think he had that level of class and poise. And as I was telling you before, he didn't put his foot in any of the tabloid traps and have that flare up. He was so good like that. I understand, incidentally, that Ursula von der Leyen, she's doing her own thing at the moment, and she's refusing, you know, advice from some people that could steer clear of that. And that is a bad thing, because I think she's making all the errors at the moment, because the EU has to take care of its own citizens, but at the same time has to take care of the EU's reputation and its interaction with other parties.
I mean, at the moment, you've got.
I think the EU and the US are finding themselves in a good place, but I think.
You mean the UK and the US? From a vaccine perspective?
No, the EU and the US on lots of issues, like, for example,
Oh,
Northern Ireland,
right.
They're consolidating. But I think that the EU under von der Leyen is screwing up with its management of the UK.
Yeah.
And I think this government under Boris Johnson is screwing up with its management of the EU, because it's far too easy for them to help whip things up against the EU for short-term sort of rating boosts. But essentially, you're a businessman.
Yeah,
you know,
well, I would be.
You need to build back business with.
Yeah,
you know,
but I would
the
be.
markets.
I would use the leverage that we've got. I would be much tougher now with our negotiations with the EU than Boris Johnson's being. No question at all. I think he's being.
I think that would be counterproductive.
Well,
and
maybe. I think he's being.
Can we come back to that in a sec?
Let's come
Because
back.
I'm aware that there are
Jessica,
so
yes.
many.
Right.
Jessica says the other byline fisherman interviewed said he had lost 99% of his business since December because of Brexit, not COVID. How does Richard respond?
Look, I haven't seen the other part of the interview, but we know there are big issues.
So basically, it was the exporting stuff, and it was
but the simple answer is
category B.
this government can do something about it. It's in charge, for heaven's sake.
Yeah.
You know, and many people may not know. It may sound sort of daft, but in a sense, this is how you actually intervene and help things when something goes wrong. So in the 80s, you know, we had wheat mountains, we had butter mountains.
Yeah.
Actually, in order to preserve what is a fundamentally important part of being a maritime nation, you know, the government should be buying up the normal quantities of fish that would normally be caught, create a fish mountain, use it for our own food.
Why not leave them in the sea, Richard, so they can keep like breeding and surviving?
Because then you've got to subsidise the people. You know, you either keep them on furlough,
right,
or you say no. Actually, you know, let's continue that process. So I would do it slightly differently.
Right.
But the point, the worst of all worlds.
As a scientist and a fundamental ecologist.
The worst of all worlds.
The notion of hauling them out of the ocean and then just dumping them on the side.
The Tories are screwing it up
keep a business
because
ticking
they're
over.
relying on free markets, and they're basically letting these fishermen and women. They're letting them sink on the free market.
So
and
that's interesting
not right.
to me. So despite being fundamentally a small government businessman, nevertheless, you think in these cases you do need the intervention in order to keep
control.
Yeah.
In an emergency, and this is an emergency for the fishing industry, the government's got to step in, and it either furloughs them.
So
or
you don't
says,
think this government
I would
is
rather they don't furlough them.
interventionist enough?
On this particular issue, there are certain issues I believe, and that's why I was very keen on the importance of control of state aid.
Yeah,
You've got to be able to intervene. So I was very clear that the government should have intervened on British steel. We should not have sold it to the Chinese.
Yes.
You know, fundamentally, Scunthorpe. You know, I went up there. I met the folk up there.
Yeah.
You know, that is actually, in my view, steel making is a critical part of our national infrastructure.
Yes.
You know,
I totally agree.
It's as important, frankly, as food and water.
Yes.
You know, without steel, you can't make buildings. Full stop, folks. And you can't rely on global supply chains when the chips are down
That's
and the SH1T hits the
interesting
fan.
because that actually overlaps with socialism, which is, in a sense, you know, the public ownership of some of the fundamentals, so that you're not just a victim of global dynamics.
Correct. But the point about that was what I learned was, of course, the reason that steel was struggling in the UK is because of the energy costs, which were like 50 and 70% higher than some of our European neighbours.
Right.
And so, you know, there are big issues here. So the government should have stepped in, it should have supported it, it should have invested in new furnace technology. Instead, what does it do? Firstly, it tried to sell it to the Turkish military, and then it sold it to the Chinese. I mean, it's
So
lunacy.
all right, even as a businessman, this is great to hear that you don't believe in selling out national assets.
Of course not. Utter madness.
Good. Right. Nick and Tosh says beers are in, so please play nice, guys. Enjoying this so far. Thanks, Nick and Tosh. So are we, surprisingly. This is scaring me. Ollie says, is this going to be a long-term plan to change the way people on other sides communicate? This is great. Ollie, I hope so, because if you're ever stuck in a rut, your mental power goes down, it gets boring, people need to be challenged, but they need to be challenged by people that they sort of fundamentally trust in a way, trust to be able to open up to. And I think one of the things that we're doing at Byline TV, you know, not just, you know, me and Richard here now, but the fundamental construct of the team here crosses left and right, and people who voted Brexit and people who voted Remain, and like off camera, like at the end of these kind of shows, we've got wasted so many times and trolled each other so many times on so many different issues. And for me, that's been really invigorating and given so much new life to it. So, I mean, that's what I hope.
It's
What
an
do you
interesting
think,
point.
Richard?
So the communication point is interesting because we've got to look forwards, not back. Wherever we're at, you know, we've got to get better. And the thing is, though, of course, with new technology, you know, Byline TV is able, you know, to create shows like this. I've just created Reform TV. We're not quite as advanced as you guys, but
It's
we've got a
good
great
with the plugs,
studio.
yeah.
And so that's another opportunity to discuss things in more depth. I've got a half-hour show on ivermectin.
Yeah.
I couldn't get it on any form of mainstream media, but people can learn about it.
Exactly. If
And
you
so
want to get
it's-
it out there,
it's a
just
way of
do it
it's a
yourself.
way of
Build it
communicating,
yourself.
and then we can build in things and have debates with people from different sides over a slightly longer period than a brutal Piers Morgan induced head-to-head for three or four, you know,
Hammering.
a couple of minutes that like, you know, you had with Anne Widdecombe today.
this morning on,
you know?
on GMB.
So, but ultimately, people get bored of that short soundbite
Yes,
and
me
actually
too.
don't learn really enough about the
I
issue.
don't watch mainstream TV anymore. I don't, because it's always the same stuff. It gives you a little bit of info, but the format's the same.
That's why we
And
want
this-
to change the way the BBC is financed.
Yeah, look, I love, you know, what the guys are building in the studio with you know, all the stuff that we've got around us, and doing it yourself, and that political entrepreneurship is actually fun and creates new fusions, where also our political parties are very stuck in the mud about lots of issues. FG says, great to hear the Reform Party questioning on Farage. Would love clarification on why he is so silent.
So look, I mean, the truth
He's
is,
left, hasn't he?
No, he's not silent. So he's honorary president. He's focusing on particularly campaign issues. So just recently, for example, he's very focused on China, the role of China in the world.
Oh, yes.
The role of you know, how much influence China is going to have here in the UK. You know, it's already creating a massive footprint. What around the world is called the Belt and Road footprint. It's buying up.
Yeah.
You know, British independent schools. You know, which. Actually, Nigel, I think, is a really bad idea. You know, like I touched on earlier about, you know, China should not be financing nuclear power stations here in the UK, let alone design and operate them. So Nigel's focused on that, particular issues that are core to his heart. Obviously, you know, he'll continue to talk about immigration, and there's a, you know, a variety of other things. So things that he can really campaign on without the, you know, look, running a political
not fish.
party. Running a,
I can't
he will
stop with this
come
one.
back to fish.
Will he
Running a
though?
political
Will he
party
though?
is really hard work. There's a reason why very few get started and succeed.
Yes.
It is brutal. It's frankly just, you know, it's semi-bonkers to try. But if you don't try, you've got no chance.
Especially in this environment,
Yeah,
where you've got first past the post.
Yeah,
You know,
it's-
what's the
yeah.
point? Yeah.
Well, the point is that actually democracy works best when there is choice, and more choice is actually means that you'll get more debate, and with more debate, voters then will arrive at better answers.
Yeah.
And that's the whole point. And that's why we have to to push on to put these other arguments. Philosophically, we are now very different from the Tories economically. You know, they are the party of the highest tax for 70 years, the lowest growth for 60 years. So they've aligned themselves with the socialists.
Yeah.
We're the only people that stand for the power of the individual, the power of the small business, self-employed, and that it's low tax that will generate higher growth, better wages, and more tax revenues to invest in healthcare. And look, I've got an expression, for example, which is...
I don't necessarily agree with your economics, but I do think
Look at
that
my plan,
we
it proves
need,
it.
On the right, so it's not just coming from the left, a party that's able to tear apart the current government on the fundamentals of democracy and shaking it up.
There's not a single high tax, high growth economy in the world.
What, not the Scandinavian countries?
They're not high growth. They're modest growth. You know, if you want high growth, if you want...
But what do you mean by growth? Is this just GDP? Because I don't believe in GDP as your fundamental measure.
What about growth per capita, growth per head? That's absolutely fundamental. And, and look at the achievements.
I think
look at the countries like
median.
Look at countries like Australia, for example. Australia, if
your median spending power and your spending power at the bottom 25%, I think are better indicators than taking aggregated growth and dividing it by per capita,
fine.
because you get a distorted...
Fine. Look at those numbers in Australia, Singapore and the US, and it leaves us and Europe embarrassingly behind. The Australia in the last 15 years has outgrown the UK by about between 25 and 30%. And that's real money in tax revenues.
Is this controlling for population growth?
If we had kept pace with the Australian rate of growth in the last 15 years, then we would have additional tax revenues every single year of almost £150 billion a year. That's another NHS. Imagine me arriving tomorrow and giving you another whole NHS budget. That's the power of compound growth, and that's why low tax, high growth is so important to being able to have the best public services in the world.
You're getting into your political pitching.
I properly am.
Have some more of that wine. And Bob says, if the Lords pull the policing bill apart, will the Commons just steamroller it through? My answer to that would be yes. I think this House of Commons has got themselves into a mode whereby they know they've got the 80-seat majority, so they just steamroller things through. I think our only hope there is that the Lords are prepared to make enough fuss that the Lords actually get more kudos with the public, and we protest this enough that it starts particularly, and this is actually, bluntly, where I think your role is more important than ours, and your angle on this needs to be more vibrant, because where the damage can most be done is on the freedom-loving, free speech, independent-minded, I want to safeguard the reputation of my country and the functioning of my country long-term, rather than slip into lazy power because it suits me. That needs to be called out, and that needs to be laid on the line. We can't do that from the left.
Yeah, well, I mean, the reality is that at the moment, I don't think anybody can do it. I mean, it's terrifying. I don't think the Lords can do it. You know, I think, frankly, this government will just ignore the Lords. And there are some times when I can understand that. And if the Lords
get too much, you know, power in terms of like too much profile, then they'll just say, we'll abolish the Lords because this isn't proper democracy. Because they come out swinging their BS left and right all over the place.
They won't abolish the Lords because, of course, as I said earlier...
that's their fundamental reward mechanism.
The power of cronyism. You know, it's the check in the back pocket.
But they've still got knighthoods.
No, it's not enough. It's not enough.
Because they want the money and they want to sit around.
A peerage pays, and it can pay quite a lot if you're quite smart. So,
44 says, Brexit has been hugely damaging for fishermen. Byline has spoken to loads of them. This is true, and this is good. And George and Kaylin here have been around the country doing that, who are suffering and didn't want this. I think people who made Brexit happen need to answer for it before we can trust them on other issues.
No, look,
I think that one's for you.
It is, and we've touched on it already this evening. But I'll reiterate that
we always responsibility for it, though.
Oh, without question, because we always campaigned that was part of the opportunity. Last year we always said this was the potential for the sellout, and sure enough, when it came to it, and you hear the weasel words from people like Michael Gove. At the end of the day, though, fundamentally, they've got the control and the levers, not us, and they've got a track record of just trampling over everybody. And so, yeah, look, we will continue to make representations.
Yeah.
We're 2.5 months in, and yeah, this is the bad bit. There's no question about that, and it needs to be sorted. And
I'm just going to throw something out there. Like, Caelan and George have been around the country chatting to, like, fishermen. And you can sit here with me and say, you know, it's the government's responsibility now. This is something we're going to champion. Would you be prepared to go with Caelan and George and chat to some of these fishermen?
Love to. Yeah,
would you?
No question. Yeah, I'd love
would
to.
you?
Yeah, no question at all.
Caelan, George, do you like that?
Yeah. As soon as we're allowed to.
Yeah. All right. Well, then we're on, because I think that would actually be, like,
Yeah, it's really important.
good for you.
It's really important. And no, look, I mean, you know,
And I think that's what people want to see, because if we're talking about accountability, it is something that you and Nigel were championing.
I talk about accountability of leadership all the time on a bunch of issues. You know, I'm the guy who's called for Cressida Dick to resign, or for Sadiq Khan to fire
Well,
her.
if you would do that,
So, of course,
I would give you respect for that, to go along, chat to them, see what they have to say, you know, about you, about where they are, about what they want, and demands that they make of you. And no, that just popped into my head.
Good idea. Let's do it.
Cool. Well, yeah. Welcome to the team then. What's happening? Right. Next question.
Oh, this is
Claire.
brutal. Claire, this is brutal. Come on. The only value we're getting from this is a hair deal. Classic. I think I win that. I think your lockdown hair has gone even more wild than mine. I mean, this is.
Yeah, but that's my selling point. My main. You know, your haircut is Tory standard.
Oh, give over. Anyway,
it's nice.
What is
it's
clear,
nice. But all right, Caelan and George are going to judge this. Who's got the better hair? Because we're getting intellectual now. We're getting no. Really?
Steed.
Oh, and he shrugs sort of coyly after it.
Kind of lockdown hair growth thing.
Oh, what? So it's 2-0, is it? So you're backing that up too?
Yeah, it's
that's got to be one of the first times I've been.
It's like Liverpool last year. You know, we were winning everything, but this year it's all going horribly wrong.
Right.
What's Steed? How's Tice beneficially?
Oh, you're reading the questions now.
Yeah.
Okay, go, Richard.
How's he even been considered to comment on COVID treatments? So actually, I mean, look, have I benefited financially? I haven't. You know, I'm not paid in any way. I've got business interests, and last year, like many people's business interests, obviously, you know, we all had frankly, a bit of a shocker.
So what are your business interests?
So my business is commercial real estate.
Commercial real estate.
Oh,
that's got to be hard, because...
Yeah, so it's been brutal. Actually, many people thought that I had
offices?
office building. No, mine's all industrial.
Okay.
So that's actually been...
That's a bit better.
That's been okay.
Because offices is just like hard hit.
Yeah, offices and shops has been the worst hit. Yeah. But yeah, there's been some challenges. But you know, the reality is, it's what's the impact on the economy? All real estate suffers when there's an economic downturn. So at the moment, you know, there's various elements. How am I being considered to comment on COVID treatments?
But no, wait on that, because I will say something in your defence, which is also in my defence, and it's something that we need to bridge going forward, which is, there's something in the question there is, you only supported Brexit because that was in your business interests. It can't be because you fundamentally believed in a different model. And similarly, when I first set up Scientists for EU, I constantly got, you know, from the right, from the Brexiteers, saying, you're only doing this because you're EU paid and you're on the gravy train. And it's like, no, because I'm not currently on an EU grant, and if I thought that the money was better spent in the UK, then I would be making the case that we don't spend that money. So
in a way, look, it's good we're both challenged on it, and it's good that we both answer the question.
But for me, it's a fundamental blockage in that you have to appreciate, as a fundamental, as a humanist, that people can have a different view of the future from you and are prepared to even lose their own money and blood or whatever for it, because that's the way the world wants to be. And it's not necessarily that they are cynical and they have commercial interests in that. And I think if we can get over that when we're talking to each other, then I think that actually opens up a lot of
Yeah, I have no
understandings.
problem with people challenging it and having a naturally cynical view about it.
Yeah,
but
healthy skepticism
healthy
about
skepticism is absolutely
motivations.
fine. That's absolutely fine, and you know, I'm happy to answer any questions on that. The second part of it is, look, the reality is we've all got the right to comment bluntly on any issue, because every citizen, from whoever, we're all equal, and we're all perfectly entitled to have opinions on anything. And of course, you know, there's nothing more relevant than at the moment than COVID. And so, sure, I've researched stuff, and I've gone down a few rabbit holes with some of that research. I've been wrong on some stuff. I was wrong on the big second wave in the beginning of this year. I didn't see it coming to that extent, but you know, I've been campaigning against lockdown. I've been pro the Great Barrington Declaration.
Oh, really?
Yeah,
now?
absolutely. And my stance on it, we'll never know. But my view is actually that if the Great Barrington Declaration approach had been adopted, rather more like the Swedish approach, the severity of this second wave would not have been as bad, because more herd immunity would have been achieved in the autumn before the variant came along. And the real question is it sod's law that the variant came along at the worst time of the year, or did the tears and the November lockdown suppress the virus into the worst, most brutal time of the year for elderly when they're going to suffer respiratory illnesses? We'll never know, but you know, that's my question mark. But look, COVID is absolutely critical.
So
and
I'll park that one up, because I could talk about that for a while. But I agree that you're allowed to be curious and to research science and to fly it by me. If I were to say, I'm the scientist and you're not, therefore shut up and listen to what I have to say, that's fundamentally authoritarian. And for me, I believe in science, and because I believe in science, I want more people in British culture to feel as though science is open to them. They can get involved with it, they can ask questions about it, they can teach themselves about it. My dad, you know, is a historian, but when he left university, he went from history into Rolls-Royce, and he loves reading science books, and so he should.
Yep.
So he loves drinking in that culture, and I want more of that. And when we started Scientists for EU, one of the fun things was we started on the Facebook page as kind of like the science community, saying, you know, we think that actually, you know, the co-working and actually the structure of the EU is very, very healthy for this interaction. But as well as doing the science posts, we're going to do memes, we're going to do fun stuff, we're going to do the news and comment on it. And that then opened it up to people who were like, I like being in this community with the scientists and science jokes. And that's part of getting science into the wider culture. So I love it that you come here and sit down with me and you tell me what you know about ivermectin, and I don't know about it, but I'll go away and look into it, because all questions, you know, are valid, and everyone should feel free to bring it forward, and then we as a culture handle it in the scientific way.
Yep.
And that way, we're not treating science as an authoritarian thing where some people have rights over others to speak. So that's my vision on that one. Claire says, Tice only cares about profit. He helped the government trample over everyone. I disliked him before this. Now I despise him.
So I've clearly failed to I've clearly failed to impress Claire. Look, no, it's not only about profit. It's about the way the country is run and managed, so that actually it works better for the people.
So I'm guessing Claire dislikes your fundamental small government approach in cutting taxes.
Yeah, but
which
my
I
point
would
is,
disagree with
yeah,
too.
But my point is the consequence of cutting taxes is, and the whole our economic plan is that it's the least well off that benefit the most, because you cut them the most for the lowest paid, the least well off, and that creates the greatest growth, and it's growth that creates tax revenues to pour into better run public services.
So you're thinking about cutting taxes at the bottom.
Absolutely, the bottom.
And
So
what about
our whole
the top?
thing? No,
Cut taxes at the top as well?
We would lift the threshold from 50,000 to 70,000 for the higher rate tax, but fundamentally it's all at the bottom. And same with businesses. It's the smaller businesses. So we would have zero corporation tax from naught to £100,000. That's over 1 million businesses. That means the self-employed, the SMEs. That means they can put more into software and equipment and you know, like this studio, for example. employ more people without having money to leak out back to Her Majesty's government. That creates more growth, more activity, and that's what stimulates growth.
So more freedom and entrepreneurship at the startup level.
Yeah, the startups,
but then
the self-employed.
at the top corporations level, keep it as it is.
So we would keep. So currently, corporation tax is 19%. The Tory governments are going to increase it to 25%.
Yeah.
We would just increase it to 20% above 100 grand a year.
Okay, so you would increase it at the top, but cut it at the bottom.
Yeah, a tiny
okay.
bit.
Kaelan, scroll again. He's writing more questions as they're piling in.
David.
But, you know, we're all in a race
Are we
here to
looking-
keep up. David says, I'm reading now, Richard. I'll
Sorry, I'm a
read
control
two,
freak.
and then you can read two. David says, are we looking at the BCG vaccine, looking at the difference between Portugal, where it's mandatory, and Spain, where it's not? Well, I can't answer that. I mean, I wasn't aware that the BCG vaccine is being employed for anything. Have you heard anything about this?
I haven't, but no, I haven't actually. So I don't know anything about that, to be honest. Or is it? Is part of the question about the issue of mandatory vaccines, vaccine passports? What are you comfortable with? What not? I'm happy to give my view on that.
Okay, go.
Which is that I think I don't like the idea of vaccine passports domestically. I think
Right.
that the government should make it clear that even if businesses, for understandable cash flow reasons, say I need them short term,
Yeah.
that after whatever it is, 12 months down the road, domestically, no one should require vaccine passports.
Yeah.
I can understand at the moment where someone like
What about the international? What about the EU's
I think-
plan for
look,
their
the reality
green
is,
thing?
look, again, in front of the market's going to decide. So, if you wanted to travel to certain countries, you had to have a yellow fever certificate.
Yeah.
We all coped with that.
Yeah,
If you
true.
want to travel to many countries, it's part of sovereign nation control. It's up to the sovereign nation to decide who they let into a country, and frankly, what vaccines they have or haven't had. Some countries, like Turkey, I think, they're going to say you don't have to have a vaccine passport.
Right.
They're going to use that as a marketing plus. That's their free market, taking because if you're a
Right,
family
so
of 4 or
you're
5,
basically saying that every country is going to do its own risk
I
analysis.
think it is.
and
Yeah, I think every
respond
country is going to
accordingly.
do its own thing. What and we'll just the consumer then has a choice.
Yeah.
If you want to travel to that country, you've got to abide by their rules. That's sovereign control.
Okay.
I cope with that. I really do not like the idea of domestic passports. I think short term they're going to come in because businesses are going to be understandably more worried about cash flow than democratic rights.
Yeah.
But I just feel really uncomfortable.
So many new dynamics in the
Yeah,
space.
this whole thing. But you're going to get this strange thing. You're going to get pubs next door to each other on the same street. One pub says you've got to have a passport, and the other pub, as a marketing advantage, is going to say, no, we're passport free, come here.
God,
That's
right,
the free
this-
market. Whether you love it or not, short term, I
Like
think that's
some-
what's going to happen.
Like
Claire
you were
would hate
saying
that
before.
even more.
So no, but like because it's going to be a wild west now in terms of how we respond, then some people are going to do really well and others are going to do badly, and it's going to be a very complex scenario. FMM6, yeah, says, Richard, what do you say to the accusations that Brexit was about very wealthy people like Farage and Mogg avoiding EU tax divorces?
I'm not quite sure what the expression EU tax divorce is related to.
So I think this is about
Tax
EU
disputes
tax
or
directives, I
Tax
think.
directives.
Yeah.
Look, at the end of the day, I think it's for sovereign nations to choose their own tax rates, and tax competition is a good thing. That's why I'm advocating. If we are a low tax nation with low corporation tax, you will attract money here, you will attract smart talent here, and the real danger now.
Isn't
the real
there
danger
then
now
a race to that where basically you've got everyone wanting to be a Monaco to try and do that,
Well,
and then
yeah, but look at it. The
shouldn't we
evidence
be
is there.
clamping
Look
down
at-
on tax havens?
Well, look at
Should we?
Ireland. Ireland's got a tax rate of 12.5%. Surprise, surprise. Where have all the tech firms globally
Yeah.
base their EU operations out of Ireland, not out of the UK, because
So do you
Ireland
think
have
we
the
should
lowest
all
tax.
be doing that, or do you
Look,
think we should
I believe
be
in competition. Competition is a good thing.
the competition within boundaries, fair play, so that we don't
but
not
fair play
undercutting
is
each
about-
other
fair
and
play
we're
is
having a
about
race
quality,
to the bottom.
Fair play is about quality of standards and equipment, and that comes back to trade deals, for example.
Right.
Fair play is not about having an EU-wide tax rate. No, so I don't agree with that. I fundamentally believe in competition within a smartly regulated framework.
Okay. Read the next question. I think that's fascinating, the next question.
Liam, Richard, from the outside, what are the main problems facing the left today, and what would make them a credible threat to the Tories? That is a great
I
question.
think that's a fascinating
So I think
question.
I suspect the left is more split between.
How could the left change that would make you think, ooh, that's kind of tasty, actually, I'm getting worried?
The interesting point, actually, Annalise Dodds
Yeah.
saying to a Tory Chancellor, don't raise taxes too quickly, and the Tory Chancellor ignoring her. And you then get into the situation where I think that the left will, the Labour Party will worry the Tories if the Labour Party starts to saying, actually, it's all about jobs and growth. And if they go for that...
Don't worry, Caleb's
then,
just dying in the corner there. I think he was...
I've obviously upset him.
No, I think he was enjoying himself and just knocking back the wine, and then it went down the wrong way, and he nearly fell out of his chair. Right.
So that, I think there's a greater split on the left, but I think there is actually an opportunity for them. I think the Tories have opened themselves. I think they've opened themselves up to risk on the left, and they've vacated the playing field, their traditional playing field, which we're now basically situating ourselves at.
Yeah.
Low tax, high growth, small government, and so I think the Tories are going to be
And
under
if
pressure.
the Tories do get nixed, if they do go down, if something does blow up on them, what do you think is their Achilles heel?
Cronyism
Right.
and the multi-million-pound contracts.
Because that's something that we
Jolly
can
and
all
Moyne
agree
is
on.
doing an amazing job.
He is.
He and I massively differ on Brexit, of course, like
Yes.
you. But he is doing an amazing job, and all credit to him. I think I did reach out to him, but no, I mean, credit where credit's due, and I'm always happy to give that.
Yes.
He is exposing some properly bad stuff went on.
Yes.
I know of at least 3 people who've bought multi-million-pound country estates on the back of PPE profits.
Really?
Yeah.
No.
And frankly, I think it's morally disgusting.
Yeah, that's fascinating. In fact, I talked with one, I think it was Lib Dem peer, who said that he knew someone who'd put in a contract to the government for PPE supply from China with all the specifications. It got rejected. And then he found out that someone else had put in exactly the same bid with the same level to the same suppliers and got it. And he was like,
some bad stuff. But what we've learned out of this is that in a time of crisis, as a nation, you mustn't be exposed to just-in-time global supply chains. We are making progress, and you'll know the data more than me, in making sure we've got sufficient vaccine manufacturing capacity here in the UK.
Yeah.
But it's not just the vaccine, it's all the components around it, the vials, and all the other bits that go into it. You've got to have all this stuff. It's like food, water, steel, vaccines,
every
medicines.
country needs to be able to have its own kitchen, its
we
own
nearly ran out of
fundamental
paracetamol.
supplies. Yeah.
And because all of that, most paracetamol
Now
was
that
made in India.
surprises me that you should say this, because usually free
No,
marketeers and business people
overreach.
are all about
overreach.
like the Minford. So you don't believe in Minford because your mate Nigel really liked Minford, but Minford is all
bits-
about one country does one thing, another country does another thing.
Overreach.
That's maximum efficiency.
You've got to be smart regulated. You've got to be smartly regulated, and where it's in the strategic national infrastructure and interest, you've got to have the capacity.
So a core of
within the next- there's
self-sufficiency.
Absolutely, a core of self-sufficiency.
Okay.
And take farming. Give or take, we produce about 60% of our food now here in the UK.
Yes.
40 years ago, that figure was about 80%. 80% is much, much more acceptable than 60%. So, these are things about core self-sufficiency.
And so
that we
what
are
do you
learning.
think about a US trade deal or a trade deal with Brazil?
Yeah, look,
That is dominated by farming and them supplying to us.
if it's not acceptable, if it's over-dominated by farming, then you would say, well, that's the road. But you can do partial trade deals. Who have we got here?
Okay,
Alex.
so we'll do Alex first, and then I like Claire's comment. Alex says, how do both sides see Hartlepool by-election playing out? Ooh, is vote splitting going to play a bog part in who wins? I guess that's a typo.
So so this is quite interesting today. There's a very many of your viewers probably don't read The Spectator, but there's an amusing article in The Spectator today, which says the Tories should poach Tice from being leader of the Reform Party.
He's good with the plugs, isn't he?
So my response is the Tories should stand aside in Hartlepool and let me run as Reform UK.
And let Tice get a foot in.
Yeah, absolutely, because
Parliament.
that will put.
How does that benefit them?
That will give massive problems for Labour and Starmer, because they would lose one of their last strongholds in the northeast.
Oh, I
so that's
see.
what if the Tories are smart and they want to put the skids under Starmer,
Yeah.
that's what they would do strategically. They won't,
Yes, but
because
of
the
course
last thing
you're
in
going
the
to
world
come
they
in
want.
line with us, right, Richard?
The last thing
because
that in
you're
the world
gonna-
they're going to want is another party, particularly me, in the House of Commons, niggling them at every stage. So that won't happen. But
Right.
anyway, this next one.
So Claire says, I'll read this. Claire says, you know what? Okay, Tice has gone up in my estimation.
Some
and Richard
progress.
is here grinning away. He's pleased with himself now because Claire was panning him before
She gave
and
me a
expressing
bad time.
disgust. Yeah. Well, listen, I mean, here's the thing. We're all human, and if someone can give you a bashing and you take it, then everyone respects that. So, yeah. Steve says, I've heard Gove say several times that the EU is anti-science. Oh, yeah, I love this one. I know he loves Brexit, but why say something that's blatantly a lie? Gove doesn't think it's a lie. So the way Gove sees it, and this goes back to actually why I started Scientists for EU in the start, because back in 2013, I was panning the EU science programme and writing papers on it and trolling the European Commission on their management of the science programme. And then I would go along to Brussels and have coffee with them, and they would be all... and I said, no, but here's what you need to do. And actually, they did a lot of those things in Horizon 2020. But in 2013, I remember conservative Eurosceptics trying to push this thing that the EU is anti-science. Whereas, in fact, the UK had been stagnant for science funding, whereas the EU had been ramping up their investment in science funding. But the reason why the Conservatives at the time were trying to push this was largely GM foods. So because EU-wide there was a clampdown on GM foods, whereas in the States they were letting it fly, the free market Tories were thinking, oh, the EU is shutting this down, damn them, they should be more open with their innovation, they should just let it happen. Whereas what the actual dynamic was is they had, you know, a science advisor at the time in 2014, Dame Anne Glover, who actually did a review and said, you know what, you know, GM food's perfectly safe to eat. That's a conclusion that comes out of the Commission. And then she was attacked by a lot of societies across Europe, which then leveraged heavily in Parliament in order, again, to keep GM foods off the agenda. And for me, it's not the European Commission that was anti-science. It was you know, properly capable of commanding any reviews that it wanted. It was the European Parliament being pressured by the European publics. And this goes to a fundamental point of the interaction between science and the public, which is you can either steamroller the public with science and say, you don't know what you're talking about, we're going to do it our own way, like they did in the States, and they got further with GM foods, but they had a huge backlash from the public and distrust in science over what they let the companies do. Or you say, you know what, if the public are saying we're not comfortable with this yet, we just have to take that like they did in the EU, and we have to have an education program about what are the risks and benefits, which the EU didn't do. So it's a frustrating part of the democratic process, but that's what it fundamentally was. And the way to address that is not to be pro-science and steamroller it, but rather to actually say, right, we need to engage in the actual education so that people are dealing with the data. But that's where it comes from. And Gove and others have kept limping forward, saying they're anti-science, they're anti-commercialisation of science, whereas in fact the EU was more pro-science than our government at the time because they were ramping up their investment in it when Cameron and Osborne were actually ignoring it. But that's something they're bringing back now with their claims about regulation. It's coming from the Conservative Party heritage rather than actually from the science community. So I agree with you that Gove is getting it wrong, but if you actually want to know the history of why they think that way, it traces back to that. Alex says, does Richard support proportional representation?
Yes.
Alex, you are
Simple.
late to the show. He said before, yes, he does. So that's another common point of the war against the Tories.
Yep,
Yeah.
absolutely. Yep. Now, we stood in the general election in 19, saying that we support PR, and that's fundamental.
And as you were saying before,
Yeah.
the rationale for it is
The rationale is
you can't get bunkered in the cronyism and trench warfare.
it increases choice, it increases the debate, and
Yeah.
actually you look. There's a difference between strong government and authoritarian government,
Yeah.
which comes into the next question. You know, I've accused, amongst many others, this government of being authoritarian and also being woke. How do I find those words? Define both words? Well, I think authoritarian. I mean, we're seeing it with this policing bill. There is nothing more authoritarian than that, and the rules and regulations around
So
lockdown
the definition
that
of
they've imposed,
authoritarian means government decides with minimum input from public and societal bodies.
yes, and actually, you know, where are our freedoms?
Yeah.
You know, the point is, we are a freedom-loving nation, and we took them for granted, and we've had a proper wake-up call, in my view, a shocking wake-up call, because we have a government that took them away. Now, some people might say it had to; it was the right thing to do, and for the early part of lockdown, fine, we can all agree that. But where we are now is a wholly different place. And I think this is where we are now is the definition of authoritarian.
In general election 2019, with the Brexit Party, you realise that if you stood everywhere, then that puts things in the balance. So you and Nigel said, you know what, we're going to pull out of this in many places.
We had to guarantee that Brexit got done, and that was the way to do it.
Yeah,
and that was the focus. But none of us.
That gave an 80-seat majority. So when the 80-seat majority came in, how did you feel about that in your heart? Did you think, right, it's going to be done now, our job is done, I'm happy with everything?
No, well,
or did you have a sense of horror that you weren't represented anymore and you'd handed it over to Boris Johnson?
Obviously, we were disappointed we didn't get any seats.
Yeah.
We thought we had a cracking chance at a couple.
Right.
Which
seats?
Which was Hartlepool, and then around Doncaster we thought we had a cracking chance to.
So you go for the Hartlepool revenge now?
Well, let's wait and see.
Right.
But 80 seats was always big. I mean, it wasn't as big as some of the Labour majorities, but we felt, well, that would definitely get it done.
Yeah.
But none of us imagined that these ministers, cabinet ministers, would go off the deep end of authoritarianism.
Yeah.
Given the first chance, just extraordinary.
You thought there were too many libertarians and
I think probably
innately in the party that had principles.
None of us have ever seen anything like it
Right.
before. So, how do I define woke? The best example really for me for woke is, there's a couple. One is freedom of speech, particularly look, everywhere. I fundamentally believe in it, and that sometimes means the freedom to offend.
Yeah.
And or be offended. That is a part of a functioning free-speaking democracy.
How is woke different from politically correct? What's the change in terms?
I don't think there is a difference.
Right.
Bluntly, I think it's the same. But here's the other example. The other example is the debate about statues and street names and our heritage and our history and sort of embarrassment, which means you can't talk about it, so you're going to cancel it. Mm-hmm. And cancelling people. I mean, take Piers Morgan, whatever anybody thinks of him. Mm-hmm. Cancelling him because he had a fundamentally strong and robust view about what Meghan Markle said. Mm-hmm. I just think that's a very bad place. You can't cancel Piers Morgan; he'll pop up somewhere else. Yeah. But ITV have tried; they're paying a heavy price for it. But so those are examples of.
Well,
of
I mean,
woke.
he kind of marched off himself when he got challenged, which seems a bit kind of like prissy on his part. I think, right.
So,
last
one.
Richard says, we'll go for this as the last one. Richard says, I could work with this guy, I guess that's referring to you, Richard, if it were not for Farage, I'm guessing.
Well, that's...
Do you think that the legacy of... Because you were saying before, right, that you're your own man. You want to carve your own audience. You've got your own, but you have been his, enabler and his number two, in his shadow because he's been a big personality. Do you think that the presence of Farage as you go forward is going to hold you back?
No. No, because I think we're going to put forward some really
Well,
bold...
Richard Prosser just
Yeah, and I think,
disagreed
look,
with you
look,
there.
yeah,
So how
yeah,
do you,
but
how do you
it's-
convince him?
Because in a sense, I suspect his view has already shifted in the last hour and a half. So roll forward.
Well, no, he just said that.
No, but he-
that's the.
If we've
he
made
just said
progress,
otherwise, Richard.
if we've made progress in a couple of hours, I think we'll make a lot more progress in the next couple of years.
Right.
As with some bold reforming plans that that are what I call common sense plans, how to run the country and our public services and our economy better, that works more effectively for everybody.
Okay, I'm being told this is the last one, but I've got one more. So then, what do you think that Nigel got wrong? Like, this is a difference between you and Nigel. I know it's a hard question to ask because you got loyalty to him, you work together.
So
where is he wrong that you think, Nigel, you got that wrong? This is why I'm different from you. This is fundamentally why I'm different from you, philosophically.
Philosophically, we're not different on sort of fundamental issues. The core message, the core contract we had, the core issues. But obviously, different people make different judgments at different times. So we had a big. He as leader of the party had a massive judgment.
What did you have
call.
a bust up about?
We did have a bust up, but ultimately there's one boss who makes the ultimate call. You make recommendations, and he made a call about when was the right time to step down the 300 seats in the general election.
Right.
And we knew that there would be a moment where we had to make that call, and he decided to wait an extra couple of weeks, and I had advised to take the moral high ground and to make that call the moment the election was called. And Nigel held on for a couple of weeks, and it was the impact for all of us was really difficult.
Okay.
And so that was a judgment call.
Yeah, but that's
ultimately
that's
the boss has to make that
cigarette
call.
paper thin difference between you and Nigel. Then
Yeah, philosophically,
so
we
you
don't-
think you're just
don't-
better at selling yourself to a wider audience, even though you're fundamentally the same person.
think, look, we're
different mask, different face.
Everyone's-
Hi, but
everyone's
I look
different.
I look nicer. My hair's nicer.
Everyone's different, and so I'm not your sort of pint drinking, fag smoking, bloke down the boozer like Nigel is, for example.
Right.
But in a sense, that's part of the strength of the differences.
Right. Okay.
And
Right, so last one, and this is absolutely the last one because we've gone so much longer than I ever anticipated. Evelyn says, what do you both think of universal basic income?
So I prefer my low tax plan for the lowest paid. So I want to take because what I believe that does is that increases the differential between working and being on universal credit.
Yeah.
So I would rather encourage more people into work, but what I would also do, I would keep increasing the minimum national wage.
Right.
So that would be the way I deal with it.
Yeah.
But then don't tax people on it until you've got to. I just think it's wrong. So the average national salary now is, give or take, a whisker under 30,000 a year. Okay. Under our proposals, you wouldn't pay any income tax until you earn 2/3 of the average national salary.
Right.
Whereas the Tories, once you earn about 35%, you're paying income tax. I just think that's wrong. It's the wrong level, and it's.
Okay.
That's
and
my view.
for me, with universal basic income, I'm very curious about it. I haven't decided on it yet. I do like the idea that as society advances and our forefathers and foremothers, have invested in the world that we have today, that we somehow have some guarantees, some benefit from that. As automation comes in, that it benefits us all, but. As a scientist, I would like to see test cases of this to see if it's genuinely enriching to people's lives and genuinely encourages them and gives them up. I don't believe in giving people money. I believe in giving people lives and opportunities. And for me, that's it. It's the quality of your own life.
Incentivize people to achieve and to work. And to be rewarded for it. That's my philosophy, and that's how our economic plan is designed and created.
And good quality work that they enjoy, not patronising work, work with opportunities, and giving people channels whereby they can do what they enjoy and value themselves, because that is the core of existing. When you think that you're doing something that builds you as a person, not whereby you're just spending your existence.
There'll be good
serving
days and bad
someone
days
else.
in any job. But,
Yeah.
But yeah, you know, fundamentally. But people need to feel valued when they work.
Yes. So for me, it's less about the money and more about can each and every individual in this country build an exciting and inspiring path and life for themselves whereby they respect themselves more and other people respect them more. And that's a big ask, but that's the fundamental sole aim for me. Okay, that's it. What's the time now?
I'm exhausted.
That's it. You know, yeah.
That's the longest session.
That was quite an epic session, so thanks ever so much,
Great
Richard.
pleasure. It's fun.
Are we cut out yet, or are you still rolling along?
We're going to cut out now.
All right, yeah, cut out now, before I just melt off my chair. Thanks very much, guys. Good night.